The thin layer of frost on the prickly pear cactus sparkled like broken glass in the weak December sun. Lila Hart pulled her worn traveling cloak tighter as the stagecoach lurched to a stop at the edge of Dusty Ford. New Mexico territory. The year was 1883, and the frontier town sprawled before her like a collection of weathered bones bleaching under the vast sky. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough from trail dust. "This here's Dusty Ford." Lila clutched her father's leather satchel containing 3 books, a tintype photograph, and the last of her money, and stepped down onto the packed earth. The main street stretched before her, Delaney's boarding house and eatery, the telegraph office doubling as a post station, Holbrook's general store, and at the far end, the Copper Dollar Saloon already humming with afternoon revelry despite the early hour. She had come here with purpose, though her stomach twisted with uncertainty. Somewhere in this dust-blown settlement was work, honest work that would keep her fed and respectable while she pursued what truly mattered, clearing her father's name. Elias Hart had been no thief, despite what the mining company claimed before his death 6 months ago. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant snow from the San Juan Mountains. Lila noticed the broken blades of the windmill near the water tower, spinning uselessly like the town's fading hopes. She straightened her spine. She'd survived worse than a tired frontier town. "You lost, young lady." A woman's voice, firm but not unkind, drew her attention. May Delaney stood on her establishment's porch, arms crossed over her flour-dusted apron. The boarding house owner had the look of someone who'd weathered enough storms to spot trouble before it arrived. "No, ma'am, I'm seeking employment." Lila met her gaze steadily. "I can read, write, and figure numbers. I can also cook and keep house." May's expression softened slightly. "Can you now? Well, most folks around here are looking for ranch hands, not educated women, though—" She paused, studying Lila with shrewd eyes. "Jacob Calder mentioned needing someone to help with the books out at his ranch. Man's got more cattle than he can count and contracts with the railroad that need proper managing." "Mr. Calder." Lila had heard the name whispered on the stagecoach, the wealthy rancher who'd built his fortune driving cattle and now owned the largest spread in 3 counties. "The very same, though I should warn you, there's been trouble brewing between him and some folks who want his water rights. Might not be the safest." The sharp crack of splintering wood cut through her words. Down the street, near the horse station, a commotion erupted. Lila turned to see 2 men circling a third, who stood with his back to the water trough. Even from a distance, she could see the gleam of a pistol in one attacker's hand. "That's Jimmy Stoker," May muttered. "One of Morgan Pike's boys. And that's, oh Lord, that's Jacob Calder they're cornering." Lila acted without thinking. Her father had taught her to shoot. "A surveyor's daughter needs to protect herself," he'd said, and though she carried no weapon, she spotted a loose horseshoe on the ground. In one fluid motion, she scooped it up and hurled it with practiced aim. The horseshoe struck the gunman's wrist with a metallic clang. His pistol discharged harmlessly into the dirt as it spun from his grip. In the moment of shock that followed, Calder moved like lightning, his fist connecting with Stoker's jaw in a blow that sent the man sprawling. The second attacker, seeing his partner down and disarmed, backed away with raised hands. "Pike just wanted to talk. Calder, about the water." "Then Pike can come himself, not send his dogs." Calder's voice carried the controlled anger of a man used to command. He was tall, perhaps 32 or 33, with the weathered features of someone who'd spent half his life under the frontier sun. His clothes spoke of prosperity, good leather boots, wool vest, but his calloused hands marked him as a man who still worked his own land. As the attackers slunk away, Calder's eyes found Lila. Something flickered across his face, surprise, assessment, perhaps approval. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, that was fine throwing." "My father taught me." The words came out steadier than she felt. Your father taught you well. He retrieved the horseshoe, examining it before his gaze returned to her. Might I know the name of the lady who just saved me considerable trouble? Lila Hart, Mr. Calder. I've just arrived seeking work. Recognition dawned in his eyes, not of her, but the name, Hart. Would you be Elias Hart's daughter, the surveyor? Her chin lifted. I am whatever you've heard about him. I heard he was an honest man who got tangled up with the wrong people. Calder's interruption was gentle but firm. I also heard his daughter could read, write, and cipher better than most men out here. That true? Yes, sir. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if reaching a decision. I've got ledgers that haven't been properly kept in months and supply contracts that need organizing. The job comes with a room in the main house, proper quarters, separate from the bunkhouse, and fair wages. Interested. Behind them, May Delaney cleared her throat meaningfully. Lila understood the warning a young woman going to work at a bachelor's ranch would set tongues wagging, but she also understood opportunity when it presented itself. I'm interested, Mr. Calder, provided the arrangement is entirely proper and professional. It will be, Miss Hart. You have my word. He glanced at the retreating figures of Pike's men. Though I should warn you, there are those who want what I have, particularly my water rights to Calder Spring. It could mean trouble. Mr. Calder, I've been facing trouble since the day they branded my father a thief. I'm not afraid of more. Something like approval flickered in his dark eyes. Then we understand each other. Can you be ready to leave within the hour? I can. As Calder strode toward the general store, May Delaney descended from her porch. Girl, you just stepped into a rattlesnake's nest. Morgan Pike doesn't give up easy, and now you've made yourself noticed. Perhaps, but I need work, and Mr. Calder needs help. May sighed. At least you've got spine. You'll need it. Pike's been spreading poison about every newcomer, especially women. Claims they're all running from something shameful. Don't you pay it no mind, half the folks in Dusty Ford are running from something. Within the hour, Lila found herself seated beside Jacob Calder on his wagon, her meager possessions secured in the bed. As they rolled out of town, passing beneath the broken windmill, he finally spoke. Miss Hart, I knew your father. Not well, but we crossed paths when he was surveying water sources for the railroad. He was mapping something important when he died, something about underground water channels. Lila's hands tightened on her satchel. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was her father's final survey map, incomplete, water-stained, but perhaps holding answers. They said he stole mining company maps. It was a lie. I know. Calder's voice was quiet. Because what he was mapping would have shown that water rights in this territory aren't what certain people claim they are. That's why Morgan Pike is so interested in my spring, and why he'll be very interested in you once he learns who you are. The road wound through stands of pinon pine and juniper, climbing gradually toward the mountains. In the distance, Lila could see the vast expanse of Calder's ranch, neat fences, grazing cattle, and a substantial house with smoke rising from its chimneys. It looked like safety, like possibility. Mr. Calder, she said carefully. Why did you really hire me? You could have found someone local for bookkeeping. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my mother was an educated woman, a healer who came west and made her own way. She taught me that learning matters, that keeping proper records matters, that treating people fair matters. When I heard Elias Hart's daughter was coming to Dusty Ford, he shrugged. Seemed like someone ought to give you a chance to prove folks wrong about your father. And if I can't prove it, then at least you'll have tried. That's more than most do. As they approached the ranch gates, a rider appeared on the horizon, spurring hard toward town, even at a distance. Lila recognized the predatory slouch, one of Pike's men, no doubt racing to report her arrival and employment. Calder noticed too. It begins, he said simply. That night, as Lila settled into her small but clean room in the Calder ranch house, she unpacked her father's photograph and set it on the simple dresser. Tomorrow would bring ledgers and contracts, supply lists and correspondence, but tonight she allowed herself a moment of hope. Through her window, she could see the vast New Mexico sky, stars beginning to pierce the darkness. Somewhere out there were the answers she sought, the truth about the water rights, about her father's death, about the maps that had cost him his life. She thought of Jacob Calder's steady presence, his quiet assurance that her father had been an honest man. It was more support than she'd had in months. Whatever Morgan Pike and his men were planning, whatever rumors they would spread, she would face it. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the wind rattled the window panes. Winter was settling over the high desert, bringing with it the promise of hard months ahead. But Lila Hart had come too far to turn back now. The first phase of her plan was complete. She had work, shelter, and an unexpected ally. Now came the harder part, staying alive long enough to uncover the truth. As she blew out her lamp and settled into bed, she whispered into the darkness, "I'll clear your name. Papa, I swear it." Outside, the broken windmill in Dusty Ford continued its useless spinning. But here on the Calder Ranch, the water flowed clear and steady from the spring. For now, at least, it belonged to Jacob Calder. But Lila had lived long enough on the frontier to know that possession and keeping were two very different things. The real fight was just beginning. The first frost of dawn melted slowly from the barn roof as Lila learned the true rhythm of ranch life. Her soft hands, accustomed to pen and paper, now struggled with the rough work of frontier survival. Old Sam, the ranch cook, showed her how to build a fire using dried cattle chips when wood ran scarce. "Ain't pretty work, miss," he said, watching her wrinkle her nose at the task. "But it'll keep you warm when the snows come hard." 2 weeks had passed since her arrival at the Calder Ranch. The ledgers she'd expected to manage were only part of her duties out here. Everyone worked every job when needed. This morning found her helping muck stalls while Jacob and his men rode the fence lines. "Hold that pitchfork like you mean it," called Rosa, the Mexican woman who ran the household. Despite her stern words, approval glinted in her dark eyes. "Señorita Hart, you learn quick, better than the last girl who came here thinking ranch work was beneath her." As Lila worked, her mind wandered to the water map hidden beneath her mattress. Each night, she studied it by candlelight, trying to understand her father's notations. The underground streams he'd marked seemed to web beneath the entire valley. Not just Calder's land, but several sections remained incomplete, the survey cut short by his death. The thunder of approaching hooves interrupted her thoughts. Jacob Calder rode in with 3 of his men, their horses lathered from hard riding. She noticed the tight set of his jaw, the way his hand rested near his sidearm. "Trouble?" Rosa asked, already knowing the answer. "A cut fence along the eastern boundary, 30 head missing." Jacob dismounted, his movements controlled but tense. "Tom found tracks heading toward Pike's territory." Lila set down her pitchfork. "Can you prove he took them?" "Proving and knowing are different things out here, Miss Hart." He met her gaze, and she saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes. "But this is how it starts: small thefts, cut fences, poisoned water holes. Pike wants me to sell, and he'll bleed me dry if that's what it takes." That afternoon, Jacob surprised her by asking her to ride with him to check the main spring. "You need to understand what we're protecting," he said, helping her mount a gentle mare named Buttercup. They rode in companionable silence through stands of cottonwoods, following a creek bed. The land opened up, revealing a natural spring that bubbled from rocky ground, feeding a pool of crystal-clear water before flowing into carefully maintained channels. "My father found this 20 years ago," Jacob said, dismounting. "Built the ranch around it. During drought years, when other springs dry up, this one keeps flowing, fed by something deep underground." Lila knelt beside the pool, trailing her fingers in the cold water. My father mentioned deep aquifers in his notes, water that travels through rock layers for miles underground before surfacing. Your father understood water better than anyone I've met. Jacob pulled a canteen from his saddlebag, filling it from the spring. That's why his maps were dangerous. Show people where water really flows, who really has rights to it, and you upset the whole balance of power out here. As they prepared to leave, Lila noticed fresh marks on nearby trees, surveyor's marks. Her heart quickened. "Mr. Calder, these blazes—" "I know. Someone's been mapping my land. Found similar marks near the house last week." His expression darkened. "Question is whether they're looking for something specific or just trying to document my water sources for a legal challenge." The ride back took them past a Navajo encampment where Jacob traded regularly. He introduced Lila to Joseph Yazzie, a tribal elder who supplied the ranch with woven goods and traditional medicines in exchange for beef and access to water during dry seasons. "This is the new bookkeeper," Joseph said in accented English, studying Lila with knowing eyes. "The surveyor's daughter? Your father was a friend to our people, miss. He marked water sources we could use freely, not claimed by any ranch." "I didn't know that," Lila said softly. "Many things your father did quietly, like a stream that runs underground unseen but giving life." Joseph handed Jacob a leather pouch. "Healing herbs for your horses. The sickness that took Tom's mare last month may spread." As they rode away, Lila asked, "How long have you worked with the Navajo?" "Since I arrived. My mother doctored their children during a fever outbreak. They remember such things." He glanced at her. "Another reason Pike hates me, I don't follow the usual rules about who belongs and who doesn't." That evening, as Lila updated the ranch accounts, she made a disturbing discovery. Several supply orders had been changed, additional items added, prices inflated. Someone with access to the telegraph office was altering Jacob's business correspondence. She brought the ledgers to Jacob's study, where he was cleaning his rifle by lamplight. "We're being overcharged by nearly 30% on feed grain, and these telegrams don't match the orders I wrote out last week." Jacob examined the evidence, his face growing grimmer. "Pike has friends at the telegraph office. This is clever bleed my finances while making it look like poor management." He looked at her with new respect. "Good catch, Miss Hart. How do we counter it?" "Send duplicate orders through the post to confirm telegraphed orders. It's slower but harder to intercept. And perhaps—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Perhaps we should use the Navajo traders more. Pike can't control their supply lines." "Strategic thinking. Your father taught you well?" He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, the weight of command lifted from his features. "May I ask you something? Why stay and fight? You could go east. Find work in a city where Pike can't reach." Lila touched the locket at her throat. Inside was a miniature of her father. "Because running would mean accepting the lies they told about him. He died believing in something, mapping something important. I won't let that die with him, even if it puts you in danger." "Mr. Calder, I watched them lower my father into a pauper's grave, branded a thief. There are worse things than danger." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the pop of the fire. Finally, Jacob spoke. "My mother used to say that water finds its way through rock, around barriers, always seeking its true path. Maybe that's what we're doing here. You and I, finding the true path." Before she could respond, the dogs began barking. Jacob was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Through the window, they could see torchlights approaching 5 riders, moving fast. "Stay inside," Jacob ordered. But Lila was already reaching for the shotgun Rosa kept in the kitchen. The riders pulled up short of the house. Pike's foreman, a brutal man named Dale Curtis, called out. "Calder, mister. Pike wants to discuss a business proposition. Peaceful-like. It's past civilized hours for business." "Curtis." "Mr. Pike says it can't wait. Something about water rights documentation that's come to light. Mentions the Hart name." Curtis's smile was visible even in the darkness. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings about the surveyor's girl working here. People might think she's continuing her daddy's thieving ways. Lila felt her temper flare, but Jacob's steady hand on her arm held her back. Miss Hart works for me. Account-keeping and correspondence, all legal and proper. Tell Pike if he has legitimate business. He can call during daylight, like a gentleman. Mister, Pike ain't much for gentlemen's ways. Curtis spat tobacco juice near his horse's feet. But I'll relay the message. Just remember, Calder, that spring of yours, has been flowing free a long time. Might be others have claim to it you don't know about. Old claims, legal claims. After they left, Lila found her hands shaking. They know something about my father's work. Or they're fishing, trying to scare us. But Jacob's expression suggested he didn't fully believe his own words. Tomorrow, we ride to town. Time to do some investigating of our own. That night, the wind howled down from the mountains, rattling windows and doors. Lila lay awake, studying her father's map by candlelight. In the margin, she noticed something she'd missed before, a series of numbers that looked like coordinates, but incomplete. Below them, in her father's cramped handwriting, the truth runs deeper than they know. A soft knock at her door made her quickly hide the map. Rosa entered with a cup of hot tea. Can't sleep. The wind speaks loud tonight. Just thinking, Lila admitted. Rosa sat on the edge of the bed, her weathered face kind. Mister, Jacob is a good man, but this fight with Pike, it will get worse before it ends. You sure you want to stay? Someone has to stand up to men like Pike. See, this is true, but standing up and surviving, these are different skills. Rosa patted her hand. Your father, he came to the ranch once. Quiet man, careful with his words. He told Mr. Jacob something I remember: water doesn't belong to any man. It belongs to the land, and we are only caretakers. Mr. Jacob never forgot those words. After Rosa left, Lila returned to the map, new understanding dawning. Her father hadn't just been surveying water sources, he'd been documenting something that challenged the very foundation of property claims in the territory. No wonder powerful men had wanted him silenced. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Tom Rodriguez, one of Jacob's most trusted hands, reported finding a dead steer near the eastern spring poisoned. The water itself seemed untainted, but the message was clear: Pike could reach them anywhere. As Jacob prepared to ride to town with several men, he turned to Lila. Can you shoot? I mean really shoot, not just lucky throws. Yes, my father insisted. He handed her a Colt .45, the metal cold and heavy. Keep this close. Rosa knows where extra ammunition is stored, if trouble comes while we're gone. I'll handle it, she said firmly, as the riders disappeared into the distance. Lila stood on the porch, the gun weight at her hip unfamiliar but reassuring. The morning sun caught the ice crystals on the cactus spines, making them flash like warnings. She thought of her father's words: the truth runs deeper than they know. Whatever secrets lay beneath this hard earth, whatever claims and counterclaims tangled like the underground streams, she would uncover them, for her father, for Jacob who'd shown her kindness, for the simple principle that might shouldn't make right. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of snow from the mountains. Change was coming to Dusty Ford, whether in the form of weather or war. Lila checked the loads in the Colt and went inside to continue her work. The ledgers wouldn't balance themselves, and every column of figures was another small victory against those who would take by force what they couldn't win by right. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled, riding the thermals above the hidden springs that gave life to this unforgiving land. Like that hawk, Lila would need to see the whole pattern from above, understand the connections others missed. The truth was down there, flowing like water through secret channels. She just had to be brave enough to follow where it led. The forged document bore the seal of Territorial Judge Clarence Travers, but Jacob's jaw tightened as he read the ornate script. Morgan Pike stood in the ranch house parlor, flanked by 4 armed men. His thin lips curved in a snake's smile, Eminent domain, Pike said smoothly. The territory needs your water for the railroad expansion. Says so right there in black and white. You've got 30 days to vacate, or we'll seize your cattle as compensation. Lila, standing near the bookshelf, felt her fingernails dig into her palms. The document was masterful forgery. She'd seen enough of her father's official surveys to recognize the authentic-looking details, but something was off about the watermark. This is theft dressed up in legal clothes, Jacob said quietly. Judge Travers has no authority over established water rights. He does now. Telegraph came through last week, new territorial regulations. For the greater good. You understand. Pike's gaze shifted to Lila. Course. Might be we could work out an arrangement. I hear Miss Hart has some of her daddy's papers, maps and such. Might be worth a trade. Get off my land, Pike. 30 days. Calder. Use them wisely. Pike tipped his hat mockingly at Lila. Ma'am, your daddy should have sold those maps when he had the chance. After they left, Jacob slammed his fist on the table. Forged or not, that document will cause trouble. Travers is in Pike's pocket. He'll uphold it if we challenge it in court. Maybe not, Lila said slowly. She retrieved her magnifying glass from the desk. Look at this watermark. It's the territorial seal from 3 years ago. They updated it in 1881. My father showed me the changes he had to update all his official surveys. Jacob leaned close, their shoulders touching as they examined the document. You're right. It's good evidence, but will it be enough? That night, the first retaliation came. Tom Rodriguez burst into the house just after midnight, his face grim. Fire in the hay barn. Mr. Calder. We got it out, but we lost half the winter feed. As the household rushed to assess the damage, Lila noticed something the others missed: fresh wagon tracks leading away from the barn, deeper than they should be. On instinct, she followed them by lantern light to a grove of cottonwoods. There, hidden under canvas and brush, sat several barrels of grain stolen from their own barn before the fire. Clever, Jacob said when she showed him. Steal the feed, burn the rest, then sell it back to us at triple the price when we're desperate come winter. Or force you to sell cattle early at a loss. Lila added, Mr. Calder, we need to document everything. Build a legal case even if the law won't help us now. Over the following days, a strange partnership developed between them. Mornings found them riding the boundaries, cataloging damage and disruptions. Afternoons were spent in the study, Lila teaching Jacob the finer points of legal documentation while he showed her how to read the land itself, which draws might hide rustlers, where water naturally collected, how to spot surveillance from the ridgelines. Your education is showing, he said one evening, watching her draft a formal complaint with precise legal language. Your experience is showing, she countered, having just learned to identify 7 different types of tracks in the dust. The moment stretched between them, loaded with unspoken possibility, before Rosa called them to dinner. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Sheriff Amos Hale rode up to the ranch alone, his weathered face troubled under his worn hat. Jacob, Miss Hart. He dismounted slowly, favoring his left knee. I ain't here official-like, but there's things you should know. They invited him inside, Rosa serving strong coffee while the sheriff gathered his words. Pike's brought in more men, hired guns from Texas, the kind that make their living in range wars. Hale stared into his cup. I'm one man with one deputy. Can't stand against that kind of force. We're not asking you to, Jacob said carefully. Maybe not, but my conscience is... The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his vest. This came through the telegraph office yesterday. Thought you should see it before it mysteriously disappears. Lila read the telegram quickly. It was from a law firm in Santa Fe, inquiring about mineral rights claims in the area, specifically mentioning the Hart survey. Her pulse quickened. Sheriff, do you know who sent the inquiry? Can't say for certain. But the operator mentioned a well-dressed Mexican gentleman was asking similar questions last week, said he represented old Spanish land grant holders. After Hale left, Lila and Jacob exchanged glances. Spanish land grants predate all other claims, she said. If someone has documentation, it could overturn everything Pike's claims, maybe even mine. Jacob's voice was steady, but she saw the concern in his eyes. Your father might have uncovered something about the original grants. That afternoon, Lila made a disturbing discovery in her father's map. Hidden in the decorative border were tiny symbols she'd thought were mere flourishes. Under magnification, they revealed themselves as coordinates not for water sources, but for something else entirely. Mr. Calder, she called, excitement breaking through her usual formality. I think my father hid a second layer of information in plain sight. They worked together through dinner, plotting the coordinates on a larger territorial map. The points formed a pattern following an old Spanish colonial road, with one location marked more prominently, a box canyon in the Sangre de Cristo foothills. I know that place, Jacob said. Coyote Canyon. There's a hot spring there, sacred to the Navajo. They say Spanish monks built a mission nearby in the 1600s, but it was abandoned. What if the original land grant documents were hidden there? What if my father found them? Before Jacob could answer, the dogs erupted in fierce barking. Through the window, they saw riders approaching not Pike's men, but Joseph Yazzie with 2 other Navajo men. Trouble comes with the wind, Joseph said without preamble when Jacob met them outside. Men camp in Coyote Canyon. They dig in the old places, disturb the sacred springs. Jacob's eyes met Lila's. Pike had somehow learned about the canyon. We need to get there first, Lila said. It's a day's hard riding through rough country, and if Pike's men are already there, then we'd better leave tonight. Jacob studied her determined face. You're talking about riding into an ambush. I'm talking about finding the truth my father died for. She straightened her shoulders. I can't do it alone, but I won't ask you to risk. You're not asking, I'm offering. He turned to Joseph. Will your people help? The old Navajo nodded slowly. The springs are sacred. Those who disturb them disturb the balance. We will watch the paths. Send word if more riders come. As they prepared for the journey, Rosa pulled Lila aside. You trust him with your life. Yes, Lila answered without hesitation. And your heart? Lila's cheeks warmed. That's not... We're business partners. Rosa's knowing smile said more than words. Be careful, Nina. The desert has many dangers, and not all of them carry guns. They left at midnight, taking Tom Rodriguez and 2 other trusted hands. The moon was new, leaving only starlight to guide them through the maze of arroyos and mesas. Lila had traded her skirts for borrowed trousers and rode astride, her father's map secured in her saddlebag. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the creak of leather and occasional whisper of wind through stone. As dawn approached, Jacob called a halt in a sheltered grove. Canyon's just ahead, he said quietly. Tom, take Miguel and scout the rim. James, watch the horses. Miss Hart and I will check the spring. Just the 2 of you. Tom's concern was evident. Smaller group moves quieter. If there's trouble, fire 3 shots. They descended on foot, following a game trail between towering pines. The air grew warmer, tinged with sulfur from the hot springs. Through the trees, Lila glimpsed crumbling adobe walls remains of the old mission. There, Jacob whispered, pointing to fresh excavations near the largest wall. Tools lay scattered about, but no guards were visible. They crept closer, Lila's heart pounding. Inside a partially collapsed room, wooden crates held yellowed documents. Spanish script covered the ancient parchment. Land grants, Lila breathed. Look at the date, 1651. Jacob studied the documents. This describes water rights for the entire valley, permanent and irrevocable. granted to the Pueblo peoples and Spanish settlers jointly, which means Pike's claims are worthless. So are the railroads. Lila carefully photographed the pages with her father's small camera. We need to... The click of a hammer being cocked froze them both. Well, the surveyor's daughter and the noble rancher. Dale Curtis emerged from the shadows, pistol trained on them. Mister, Pike figured you'd come sniffing around. That map your daddy left wasn't as secret as you thought. These documents belong to everyone, Lila said, surprised by her steady voice. The truth. Truth is what men like Pike say it is. Curtis smiled coldly. Now step away from those papers. In the tense silence that followed, Lila felt Jacob shift slightly, preparing to move. But before either could act, an arrow whistled through the air. Striking the gun from Curtis's hand, Joseph Yazie's grandson materialized from the rocks above. The springs remember all who honor and dishonor them, the young man said. Curtis scrambled for his weapon, but Jacob was faster, his boot pinning the man's wrist. Tell Pike it's over. These documents are going to the territorial governor, with copies to every newspaper from here to San Francisco. You think paper matters against money and guns? Curtis spat. I think truth matters, Lila said, gathering the precious documents. My father believed that. So do I. As they secured Curtis and prepared to leave, Jacob touched her arm gently. Your father would be proud. He was just trying to do what was right. Tears she'd held back for months threatened to fall. All those nights he worked on that map. He knew it was dangerous, but he said water was life out here, and life belonged to everyone. He was right. Jacob's voice was soft. And so are you. The journey back was tense but uneventful. Pike's other men, seeing their plan exposed and surrounded by Navajo warriors who knew every rock and shadow, had fled in the night. As they rode into the Calder Ranch with their precious cargo, the rising sun painted the mountains crimson and gold. The fight wasn't over. Pike would retaliate. The legal battles would be complex, but something fundamental had shifted. Miss Hart, Jacob said formally as they dismounted. I believe it's time we discussed a more permanent partnership. This ranch needs someone who understands both law and land, someone who fights for what's right. Before Lila could respond, Tom Rodriguez came running. Mister, Calder riders coming, lots of them. They turned to see a cloud of dust on the horizon. But as the group drew closer, Lila gasped. It wasn't Pike's men. It was a delegation led by the Mexican gentleman from Santa Fe, accompanied by what appeared to be territorial officials. Senor Calder, Senorita Hart. The lead rider dismounted with elegant precision. I am Don Alejandro Vasquez, representing the descendants of the original land grant holders. We received word that certain documents have been recovered. Lila and Jacob exchanged amazed looks. Their midnight raid had already borne fruit. The truth, like water, had found its way to the surface as she handed over the carefully preserved grants to be authenticated. Lila felt her father's presence strongly. He'd started this river of justice flowing. Now it was her task, their task, to see it reach everyone who thirsted for it. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since her father's death, Lila Hart believed they might actually win. The rain hammered against the courthouse windows as Lila and Jacob slipped through the side entrance at midnight. The building stood empty save for the night watchman, who conveniently dozed at his post, Rosa's sleeping draught in his coffee, ensuring they'd work undisturbed. County records are upstairs, Jacob whispered, water dripping from his oilcloth coat. Telegraph office keeps copies of all territorial communications in the basement. They split up, planning to meet in 20 minutes. Lila descended the narrow stairs, her father's camera tucked safely in her satchel. The basement smelled of must and old paper, rows of filing cabinets stretching into darkness. She lit her lantern with steady hands, though her heart raced. The telegraph records were organized by date. She pulled the volumes from the past year, scanning quickly. Her breath caught there. In faded ink were messages between Judge Travers and Morgan Pike. But these weren't about water rights. Shipment arrives Tuesday. Heart becoming problematic? Suggest permanent solution. Confirmed. Make it look accidental. Map must be recovered intact. The next entry, dated 2 days before her father's death. Hart refuses all offers, proceeding as discussed. Lila's hands trembled as she photographed the pages. Her father hadn't died in a surveying accident, he'd been murdered. Footsteps on the stairs made her douse the lantern. But it was Jacob, his face grim in the darkness. Found something you need to see, he said quietly. In the records room, he showed her a contract dated 5 years prior. Pike had purchased water rights, but only to a small parcel. The rest of his claims relied on forged addendums, all witnessed by Judge Travers. But there's more. Jacob pointed to a surveyor's note in the margin. Look at this boundary description. It references a spring that doesn't exist, at least not where they claim. Lila studied the coordinates. These numbers, Jacob, these match a dry canyon 20 miles from your land, if Pike's been claiming water rights based on false surveys. Then every contract he's signed is fraudulent. Jacob's eyes met hers. We have him. A door slammed somewhere above. Voices echoed down the stairwell, rough, urgent. Night watchman must have woken up, Jacob muttered. Backstairs. They ran through the maze of storage rooms, Lila clutching the precious evidence. Lightning illuminated their pursuers through a window. Pike's men, led by Dale Curtis despite his recent capture. Someone had paid his bail. The back door was locked. Jacob shouldered it hard. Wood splintering. They burst into the rain-soaked alley as shouts erupted behind them. The livery stable, Jacob gasped. Tom's waiting with horses. They splashed through muddy streets, the storm masking their flight. A shot rang out, the bullet sparking off a metal sign inches from Lila's head. Jacob pulled her into a doorway, returning fire to drive their pursuers back. When I say run, you run. He said, don't stop, no matter what. I'm not leaving you. That's an order, Miss Hart. But before either could move, horses thundered into the alley from both ends. Lila's heart sank. They were trapped. Then lightning revealed the lead rider's face, Don Alejandro Vasquez, accompanied by territorial marshals. Stand down, the Don commanded. Curtis and his men hesitated, caught between authorities. These two were breaking into county records. Curtis tried. Thieves. These two were gathering evidence under my authority. Don Alejandro interrupted smoothly. As, special investigators for the territorial governor. He produced an official-looking document. Any interference will be considered obstruction of justice. It was a bluff Lila could tell, but Curtis couldn't be certain. He and his men retreated, snarling threats. Later, in the warmth of May Delaney's boarding house kitchen, Don Alejandro explained, Joseph Yazzie sent word you'd gone to town. I suspected you might need assistance. The governor didn't really appoint us investigators. Jacob said, Not yet, but he will when he sees what you've uncovered. The Don accepted a cup of coffee from May. My family has fought for decades to restore proper water rights. Your evidence provides the key we've needed. Lila spread the photographed documents on the table. Pike ordered my father's death. It's here in the telegraph records. Silence greeted this revelation. Finally. May spoke. Child, that's a heavy burden to bear. What will you do? See justice done. Lila said firmly. But first, we need to protect the originals and get copies to authorities Pike can't influence. The federal marshal in Denver. Don Alejandro suggested. Judge Carson is an honest man, beyond Pike's reach. Jacob had been quiet, studying the fraudulent water contracts. Now he looked up. This false spring Pike claims I know that canyon. If we could prove no water exists there, we'd destroy his entire claim, Lila finished. When? Tomorrow, but Pike will expect that. Jacob's brow furrowed. Unless Unless we make him think we're going elsewhere, Don Alejandro said slowly. I could make a very public departure for Santa Fe, talking loudly about filing papers there. Draw his attention north. While we go south to the canyon, Lila added. May shook her head. You're talking about riding straight into rattlesnake country, literally and figuratively. Pike's men know that terrain. So do I. Jacob said, Ran cattle there before the drought made it impossible. There are ways Pike's men won't know. Thunder crashed overhead, making them all jump. The storm was worsening, but Lila saw it as an ally. Rain would wash away tracks, make pursuit difficult. We leave at dawn, she decided. Mr. Vasquez, can you arrange the diversion? With pleasure. Senorita, your father was a good man. It's time his killers faced justice. The next morning dawned gray and misty. Don Alejandro made a grand production of leaving town, his entourage loaded with document cases, as predicted. Several of Pike's men followed. Meanwhile, Lila and Jacob slipped out through the back trails with Tom Rodriguez and a Navajo guide named Samuel Tsosi. The rain had stopped, but clouds hung low, providing cover. The journey to Skeleton Canyon, the local name for Pike's claimed water source, took them through increasingly desolate country. Saguaro cacti gave way to barren rock, the trail narrowing until they rode single file. There, Samuel pointed to a barely visible path. Old smuggler's route. Very dangerous. They dismounted, leading the horses along a ledge barely 3 feet wide. Below, the canyon yawned hundreds of feet deep. Lila kept her eyes fixed ahead, trusting her mount's sure footing. Halfway across, movement caught her eye. On the opposite rim, riders appeared. Pike's men, rifles glinting. They knew. Tom cursed. It's a trap. No, Jacob said quietly. Look closer. They're watching the main trail below. They don't know about this route. They completed the crossing in tense silence, then descended into a hidden valley. There, in the center of Pike's supposed water claim, lay nothing but sand and bleached bones. Bone dry, Tom said. Always has been, far back as anyone remembers. Lila photographed everything: the parched earth, the false survey markers Pike had placed, the complete absence of vegetation that would indicate water. Jacob collected soil samples, proving the ground hadn't held moisture in years. This is enough, Lila said. With this and the telegraph records. A rifle shot echoed across the valley. Their Navajo guide cried out, clutching his shoulder. Ambush, Tom yelled, diving for cover. Pike's men poured from concealed positions among the rocks. They'd been waiting, after all, using the decoy group to lure their quarry. Jacob dragged Samuel behind a boulder, pressing his bandana against the wound. Can you ride? Yes, the guide gasped. But they have the high ground. Lila peeked out, counting muzzle flashes. 6, maybe 7 men. We're outnumbered. But not outmaneuvered. Jacob studied the terrain with a cattleman's eye. Tom, see that arroyo? If we can reach it, it leads to a box canyon with another exit Pike won't know. That's 50 yards of open ground. Tom protested. Then we'd better make them keep their heads down. Lila checked her rifle, surprising the men with her calm. On 3, what followed was the longest minute of her life. They broke cover together, firing steadily at the ridgeline. Bullets whined past, kicking up spurts of sand. Samuel stumbled, and Lila grabbed his other arm, half dragging him to safety. The arroyo provided blessed cover, though shots still rang overhead. They retreated deeper, leading the horses through twisting passages. Dead end coming up, Tom warned, but Jacob pointed to a crack in the rock face. Through there! Single file! The passage was barely wide enough for the horses, darkness closing around them. Then, miraculously, they emerged into a wider canyon and found themselves face to face with Sheriff Hale and a posse. Heard the shooting, the sheriff said calmly. Thought you might need help." "Since when do you ride against Pike?" Jacob asked warily. Hale's weathered face showed years of struggle. "Since I saw them telegraph records Miss Hart sent to my office this morning. Man can only compromise his conscience so far." With the posse's support, Pike's ambushers retreated. They escorted the wounded Samuel to safety, the evidence intact. That evening, back at the Calder Ranch, Lila worked by lamplight to develop the photographs. Jacob sat nearby, his arm in a sling from a grazing bullet she'd insisted on treating. "We make a good team," he said quietly. "We do." She met his eyes over the chemical trays. "My father would have liked you. You both believe in doing what's right, regardless of the cost." He raised a daughter with the same belief. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Rosa bustled in with supper, breaking the spell. Later. As Lila prepared the evidence packages for Denver, she found a note in her father's journal she'd overlooked. "If something happens to me, find Jacob Calder. He's the only honest man in 100 miles. She looked out the window to where Jacob stood watching the stars, keeping guard as he did every night now. Her father had known. Somehow, he'd known where she'd find both justice and something more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Pike wouldn't surrender easily, and the legal battle would be complex. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of hope. The truth was surfacing like the water her father had mapped pure, unstoppable, bringing life to parched ground. She stepped onto the porch, drawn by something stronger than caution. Jacob turned at her approach, his expression softening. "Can't sleep." Too much to think about. She stood beside him, aware of his solid presence. "We've started something that can't be stopped now." "Scared. Terrified," she admitted. "But also, ready. My father used to say courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Wise man. Jacob's hand found hers in the darkness. "We'll see this through. Lila, together." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The word hung in the air like a promise, warming her more than any fire could. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal courses, indifferent to human struggles. But beneath their light, two people stood united in purpose, ready to face whatever storms the morning would bring. The water would find its way, it always did. The pursuit had lasted through the day, Pike's riders dogging their trail like wolves. Now, as purple dusk settled over the mountains, Jacob guided Lila through a narrow defile known only to the Navajo and a few old-timers. Steam rose ahead, the sulfur scent of hot springs carrying on the cool evening air. "Coyote Springs," Jacob said quietly. "We'll lose them in the canyon maze. Their horses need rest as much as ours." They dismounted at the pool's edge, where mineral-rich water bubbled up through ancient rock. Pine trees formed a natural shelter, their branches blocking the rising moon. In the distance, they could hear Pike's men shouting to each other, voices echoing off stone walls as they searched the wrong passages. "You're hurt." Lila noticed blood seeping through Jacob's shirt where the bullet had grazed him earlier. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Sit." Her tone brooked no argument. By the pool's edge, she helped him remove his shirt, trying to stay clinical despite her awareness of his proximity. The wound was shallow but dirty. She cleaned it with water from her canteen, hands gentle but sure. "Where did you learn doctoring?" he asked, watching her work. "My father. We were often far from towns. He said self-sufficiency meant survival." She tied off the bandage, fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. "There, try not to tear it open again." "I'll do my best." His voice was low, intimate in the gathering darkness. They sat in silence, the weight of recent days pressing down. Tomorrow they would reach the federal marshal. Tonight, they were simply two people who'd found each other against all odds. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lila began carefully, "about partnerships." Jacob turned to her, face half-shadowed. "And My father wrote something in his journal. He said you were the only honest man in 100 miles. He wanted me to find you if anything happened. Elias was a good judge of character. Was he right about you? Jacob was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I try to be the man my mother raised. Don't always succeed, but with you... He paused, choosing words carefully. You make me want to be better than I am. The confession hung between them like morning mist. Lila felt her heart racing. Not from fear now, but from something far more dangerous. Jacob, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, working beside you, fighting alongside you, I've felt more myself than I have since Father died. Maybe more than I've ever been. Lila? He turned fully toward her, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. You're young, educated. You could have a life back east, away from all this violence and struggle. I could, she agreed. But that wouldn't be living. Not for me. I was born to this land. Same as you. My father understood that. I think you understand it too. The space between them seemed to shrink. Jacob raised his hand, fingertips barely grazing her cheek. Are you certain this life? It's not easy. The ranch, the fights that are coming. I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for real, for true. She caught his hand, holding it against her face. For someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. Is that what you think I offer? I think, she said softly, that you offer exactly what my heart has been searching for, even when I didn't know it was searching. The moon broke through the pine branches, painting the spring in silver light. In that moment, looking at her face illuminated like a Renaissance painting, Jacob felt the last of his walls crumble. Lila Hart, he said formally, I'm going to kiss you now, unless you tell me otherwise. I'm telling you otherwise? She said, and his heart dropped until she continued. I'm telling you to stop talking and just do it. Their lips met beside the ancient spring, gentle at first, then with growing certainty. It was a kiss that held promises, that spoke of tomorrows they'd build together, of nights they'd weather storms side by side. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. I love you, Jacob said simply. I've been fighting it, telling myself it was too soon, too complicated, but nearly losing you today. Life's too short for that kind of cowardice. Then it's good you found your courage, Lila whispered. Because I love you too. Have since that day you trusted me with your ledgers, showed me I could be useful, be valued for my mind and not just pitied for my loss. They talked through the night, sharing dreams and fears. Jacob spoke of wanting to build schools, to make the territory better for the next generation. Lila told him of her hope to continue her father's work, mapping water sources for all to use freely. Their hands remained entwined, an anchor in the darkness. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they prepared to leave. The voices of Pike's men had faded hours ago, lost in the canyon's labyrinth. Standing by the spring one last time, Jacob took her hands formally. When this is over, when Pike is brought to justice and the water rights are settled, I want to marry you. Not because you need protection, not because society expects it, but because I can't imagine facing another sunrise without you beside me. Lila felt tears prick her eyes. That's a long proposal, Mr. Calder. I'm a thorough man, Miss Hart. Best you know that now. She laughed, the sound bright as the morning birds beginning their songs. Then I'll be equally thorough. Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need a home, not because I'm seeking security, but because you're my choice, today and always. As she spoke the words, something her father had written came back to her. Virgin fell into his arms, rich cowboy kissed the naked girl like he owned the stars, chose her forever. She'd thought it was about someone else's story when she'd found it in his papers. Now she understood. Somehow, impossibly, her practical father had been a romantic, had seen this moment coming. They sealed their promise with another kiss as the sun crested the mountains. Then, hands clasped, they mounted their horses and rode toward destiny. The fight with Pike waited. The federal marshals waited. Justice for her father waited. But in this moment, riding beside the man she'd chosen and who'd chosen her in return, Lila Hart felt utterly complete. The water had found its course, cutting through stone and circumstance to flow where it was meant to. And like that water, their love would endure, would nourish, would find its way through whatever obstacles lay ahead. Behind them, the hot springs continued their eternal bubbling, witness to another love story written in the harsh and beautiful language of the frontier. The land would remember, even if the people forgot. It always did. The church bell tolled across Dusty Ford as Jacob Calder stood before the Sunday congregation, the original Spanish land grant documents in his hands. Beside him, Lila held her father's completed water map, finally whole after she'd discovered the missing pieces hidden in his surveying equipment. These documents prove what we've suspected. Jacob's voice carried clearly through the packed church. Water rights in this valley belong to everyone, not to any single man or company. The Spanish crown granted them in perpetuity to all settlers and native peoples. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ranchers, farmers, townspeople all had gathered after word spread of the discovery. At the back, Don Alejandro Vasquez nodded approvingly, while Sheriff Hale stood near the door, badge prominent, finally choosing a side. Lila stepped forward, unrolling her father's map. This shows every water source in the territory springs, underground streams, seasonal flows. My father died to complete this truth. No one can claim what belongs to all. That's a pretty speech, Miss Hart. Morgan Pike's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen hired guns. Dale Curtis smirked beside him, hand resting on his pistol. But papers don't mean much when they burn. Pike lit a cigar, the flame dancing dangerously close to the documents. Accidents happen, fires start, whole towns sometimes. You're in a church, Pike, Sheriff Hale said, stepping forward. Have you no decency? Decency doesn't dig wells or drive cattle. Sheriff, power does. Pike's eyes never left Jacob. Last chance, Calder. Sell me the spring, or watch everything burn. You'd burn a town for water. May Delaney's voice rang with disgust. I'd burn the whole territory if it profit me. Woman. That's when Lila noticed the smell kerosene. Through the windows, she spotted Pike's men splashing liquid on the buildings along Main Street. Her blood ran cold. You're all witnesses. Pike continued. Terrible drought we're having. Fires start so easily. Course my boys could help fight it if Calder signs over his water rights. And if I refuse, Jacob's voice was steady, then hope you're better at rebuilding than firefighting. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some ranchers reached for concealed weapons, but Pike's men had the exits covered. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Wait. Lila stepped forward, mind racing. You want water, Mr. Pike. Then let's settle this properly. Single combat, you and Jacob. Winner takes the documents and the spring. Loser leaves the territory forever. Pike laughed. Why would I accept that when I hold all the cards? Because if you burn the town, you'll have federal marshals here within days. We've already sent copies of these documents to Denver. She smiled at his flicker of uncertainty. Oh yes, Mr. Pike. Did you think we'd keep our only evidence here, but if Jacob loses fairly? I'll telegraph them to stop the investigation. Your choice, take your chances with federal law, or settle it like men. The crowd held its breath. Pike's jaw worked as he calculated. Finally, he ground out his cigar. Curtis fights for me. Then Tom Rodriguez fights for me, Jacob said immediately. No, Lila's voice cut clear. You challenge Jacob. Face him yourself, or admit you're the coward everyone knows you to be. The insult hung in the air. Pike's face flushed red. Fine, Clear the street." The congregation filed out, forming lines along Main Street. Someone had kicked over the kerosene buckets, preventing immediate arson. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the two men faced each other in the dusty thoroughfare. "Standard rules?" Sheriff Hale asked, clearly uncomfortable but duty-bound. "Draw and shoot." Pike agreed. "Last man standing wins." Jacob checked his Colt, movements calm despite the stakes. Lila wanted to run to him, to beg him to reconsider, but she knew this had been inevitable from the start. Some fights couldn't be avoided, only one. "Gentlemen, take your positions." They stood 20 paces apart. Pike's expensive pistol gleamed, custom grips and filed trigger betraying a gunfighter's weapon. Jacob's was worn but well-maintained, a working man's tool. On the count of 3, Hale announced. Lila found herself holding her breath, Rosa's hand gripping hers tightly. 1. Pike's men spread along the building, hands near weapons. 2. Joseph Yazzie and several Navajo warriors appeared on the rooftops, bows visible, a clear warning against treachery. 3. Both men drew. The shots rang out so close together they sounded as one. For a heartbeat, both stood frozen. Then Pike staggered, red spreading across his vest. His gun fell from nerveless fingers. But Jacob was also hit, clutching his side as blood seeped between his fingers. "Jacob!" Lila ran to him as he dropped to one knee. "I'm all right," he gasped. "Just caught the edge." Pike crawled toward his fallen gun, hatred burning in his eyes. But Sheriff Hale's boot came down on the weapon. "It's over. Pike, you lost." "This isn't finished," Pike coughed, blood flecking his lips. "My men are outnumbered and surrounded," Don Alejandro announced. Indeed. Townspeople had emerged from buildings carrying rifles, while the Navajo commanded the high ground. "Your reign of terror ends today." Doc Morrison rushed to tend both wounded men. Pike's wound was serious but not fatal. The bullet had punctured a lung but missed the heart. Jacob's was a deep graze along his ribs, painful but clean. As they bandaged Jacob, Lila knelt beside him. "That was foolish. You could have been killed." "So could the whole town." He caught her hand. "Some things are worth the risk." "Mr. Calder." Dale Curtis approached, hands raised. Without Pike's authority, he looked diminished. "We're pulling out. No profit in a losing fight." "Smart choice." Jacob stood with Lila's help. "Take Pike and go. If any of you show your faces here again." "We won't." Curtis helped load the semi-conscious Pike onto a wagon. Man knew how to pay, but he never knew when to quit. He paused. "That map real about the water?" "Every word." Lila confirmed. Curtis nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time this territory tried something different than might makes right." As the hired guns departed, the townspeople gathered in the street. The crisis had united them in a way years of shared hardship hadn't. "So, what happens now?" asked Ben Murphy, who owned a small farm downstream from Calder's ranch. Jacob looked at Lila, then at the assembled crowd. "We form a water cooperative. Equal shares, equal votes. The documents go to the territorial capital for official recording, and copies stay here in a town trust." "You'd give up exclusive rights to your spring?" Murphy sounded skeptical. "Water belongs to the land." Jacob quoted Elias Hart. "We're just caretakers. Besides," he squeezed Lila's hand, "I've learned that sharing strength is better than hoarding it." Sheriff Hale cleared his throat. "I'll be resigning, effective immediately. Town needs a lawman who didn't wait so long to do right, but I'll stay until you elect someone proper." "Stay and do the job right this time," May Delaney suggested. "Everyone deserves a second chance to choose correctly." The crowd murmured agreement as they dispersed to tend wounds and repair damage. Lila noticed several of Pike's former supporters quietly switching sides. Victory had a way of clarifying allegiances. That evening, as Doc Morrison finished treating Jacob's wound at the ranch, Don Alejandro prepared to leave for Santa Fe with the original documents. The territorial governor will ratify the water cooperative within the month. He promised. Your father's work won't be forgotten, Miss Hart. After he left, Jacob and Lila sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains crimson. The day's violence seemed distant now, replaced by profound relief. We did it, Lila said softly. Father's map. The truth about the water, it's all in the open now. You did it, Jacob corrected. Your courage, your intelligence. I just provided the muscle. We did it together. That's what partners do. He turned to her, expression serious despite his exhaustion. Speaking of partners, I meant what I said at the Springs. When you're ready, I want to make it official. Jacob Calder, are you proposing to me again? I'll keep proposing until you set a date. She laughed, mindful of his bandaged ribs as she leaned against his shoulder. Spring wedding when the desert blooms. Perfect. Life returning after hardship. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Though every day with you feels like spring. A rider approached in the growing dusk. Tom Rodriguez, grinning broadly. Boss Miss Hart, you'll want to hear this. Curtis and his boys dumped Pike at the county line and kept riding. But first, Curtis left this. He handed over a leather portfolio. Inside were Pike's private papers, deeds, contracts, correspondence, evidence of years of fraud, intimidation, and worse. Why would he give us this? Lila wondered. A note here says Curtis had family burned out by Pike years ago. Been waiting for someone strong enough to stand against him. Tom shook his head. Guess today he figured the tide had turned permanent. Jacob studied the papers. This implicates Judge Travers, several territorial officials. The corruption goes deep. Then we root it out, Lila said firmly. All of it. Father didn't die just to stop Pike. He died to change how things are done. That's a big task. Good thing I'm marrying a partner who thinks big. As night settled over the ranch, they made plans. The water cooperative would need bylaws, the evidence against corrupt officials would need careful handling, and the ranch still needed running, but for the first time since her father's death. Lila felt the future opening before her, not just survival, but possibility. Inside, Rosa had prepared a celebration dinner. As the ranch hands gathered, Joseph Yazzie arrived with several tribal elders. The Springs remember those who protect them, he said formally. The Calder Ranch has proven itself a good neighbor. This alliance will continue. To good neighbors. Jacob raised his glass of water fitting, given what they'd fought for. And to Elias Hart, who saw the truth and paid the price for showing it to the rest of us. To justice flowing like water. Lila added, reaching everyone who thirsts for it. As glasses clinked and voices rose in celebration, she felt her father's presence strongly. He would have loved this moment enemies become allies. Truth defeating lies. Water flowing freely to all who needed it. The fight with Pike was over, but the real work was just beginning. Building something better always was harder than tearing down. But looking around the table at faces lined with hope instead of fear, Lila knew they were ready for the challenge. Tomorrow would bring its own tests. Tonight, they'd earned their peace. The courthouse in Santa Fe stood like a fortress of justice against the morning sky. Inside, the gallery overflowed with citizens from across the territory who'd traveled to witness the trial of Judge Clarence Travers and his co-conspirators. Lila adjusted her best dress borrowed from May Delaney and tried to calm her nerves as she prepared to testify. State your name for the record. The prosecutor, William Marshall, instructed, Lila Catherine Hart. And you are the daughter of Elias Hart, the surveyor. I am. For the next hour, Lila presented the evidence she and Jacob had gathered: the forged water documents, the telegraph messages ordering her father's death, the false survey claims. Her voice remained steady, even when describing finding the confession in Pike's papers that detailed how they'd staged her father's accident. "The defendant would have us believe these are fabrications," Marshall said. "What proof do you have of their authenticity?" Lila produced the originals, along with sworn affidavits from the telegraph operator who'd finally come forward, terrified of prosecution. Additionally, Mr. Curtis, formerly in Pike's employ, has agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Dale Curtis took the stand. The former gunman looked smaller in his Sunday clothes, without weapons to bolster his presence. "I was there when Judge Travers took bribes," Curtis stated flatly. "Watched him change water rights documents, backdate claims, threaten folks who wouldn't sell. Pike paid him monthly. I delivered the money myself." "And Elias Hart," Marshall prompted. "Pike ordered him killed when he wouldn't falsify surveys. Said Hart knew too much about the old Spanish grants." Curtis met Lila's eyes briefly. "I didn't pull the trigger, but I didn't stop it neither. Man was just doing his job honest. Didn't deserve what happened." The defense attorney, imported from Denver at great expense, tried to discredit Curtis as a criminal seeking revenge. But when Marshall presented Pike's own ledgers showing payments to Travers, the case solidified. Jacob testified next, detailing the systematic harassment, the burned hay, the poisoned cattle. His calm recitation of facts carried more weight than any emotional appeal when he described finding Lila's father's hidden map and realizing its implications for the entire territory's water rights. Even the judge leaned forward with interest. "Mr. Calder," the defense attorney challenged, "isn't it true you stood to gain from Pike's downfall, that you wanted to eliminate competition for water rights?" "I stood to gain from justice being served," Jacob replied evenly. "As for water rights, I've already signed them over to a community trust. Every rancher, farmer, and townsperson now has equal say in water management. I kept only what I need for my ranch, same as everyone else." The revelation caused a stir. The defense attorney struggled to recover. "A convenient gesture after the fact." "A gesture made before any arrests," Jacob interrupted. "The documents were filed 2 weeks ago. Check the records." By the third day of testimony, the outcome seemed inevitable. Witnesses from across the territory came forward, ranchers forced to sell, families driven from their homes, businesses destroyed by Travers's corrupt rulings. The pattern of abuse stretched back years. When the jury retired, Lila and Jacob waited in the hallway with their supporters. Sheriff Hale, still wearing his badge after the town voted to retain him, paced nervously. "Juries can surprise you," he muttered. "Travers has friends." "Had friends," May Delaney corrected. "Rats flee a sinking ship. Amos, you should know you almost fled yourself." The sheriff flushed but nodded. "Fair point." After only 2 hours, the jury returned. Lila gripped Jacob's hand as the foreman stood. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty." The word rang through the courtroom like a church bell. Travers sagged in his chair as the foreman continued through the other charges: fraud, corruption, extortion, guilty on all counts. "Clarence Travers," the judge intoned, "you betrayed the sacred trust of your office. You perverted justice for profit and caused the death of an innocent man. I sentence you to 25 years hard labor in the territorial prison." As guards led Travers away, his co-conspirators received their sentences, varying terms for the banker who'd falsified loans, the territorial clerk who'd altered documents, the railroad executive who'd paid for favorable rulings. The network Pike had built crumbled completely. Outside the courthouse, Lila stood in the bright Santa Fe sunshine, feeling as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. Jacob wrapped an arm around her as well-wishers congratulated them. "Your father can rest now," Don Alejandro said quietly. "Justice has been served." "Part of it," Lila agreed. "The rest comes from building something better." The ride back to Dusty Ford took 3 days, At every settlement, people emerged to thank them, to share their own stories of Pike's tyranny. Word had spread fast the territory had examples now of ordinary people standing against corruption and winning. When they finally crested the ridge above town, they found unexpected activity where the burned hay barn had stood. A new structure was rising. Townspeople and ranchers worked side by side, raising walls and setting beams. "What's this?" Jacob asked Tom Rodriguez, who met them at the ranch gate. Community decided you'd lost enough fighting for everyone. Folks contributed lumber, labor, whatever they could. Tom grinned. "Rosa's been directing things like a general. That woman's scary when she's organizing." Indeed, Rosa stood in the middle of the construction, directing placement of support beams with mathematical precision. She spotted them and marched over. "About time you returned." Senor Calder, "The new barn will be ready for winter feed." "Senorita Hart, May Delaney has been asking about wedding preparations. She says spring will arrive before you know it." Lila laughed. The sound, light and free. "One challenge at a time, Rosa." That evening, the community gathered for a celebration dinner in the half-finished barn. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. Joseph Yazzi's family had brought traditional fry bread. The German homesteaders supplied sausages and sauerkraut. The Mexican vaqueros provided spicy beans and tortillas. It was the territory in miniature, diverse people united by shared struggle and victory. Sheriff Hale stood to speak, tapping his glass for attention. "I ain't one for speeches, but this needs saying. For too long, we let fear rule us, let powerful men divide us. These two," he pointed at Jacob and Lila, "showed us a different way. Not easy, not safe, but right. To courage." "To courage," the crowd echoed. Later, as the celebration continued, Lila found herself at her father's grave in the small cemetery outside town. Jacob had paid for a proper headstone. Elias Hart, surveyor, father, truth seeker. His maps showed the way. "I hope I made you proud, Papa," she whispered. He'd be more than proud. Jacob appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "He'd be amazed at what you've accomplished." "We accomplished." "No, Lila, I provided support, but you drove this. Your intelligence, your determination, your refusal to accept injustice." He handed her the coffee. "I've been thinking about the Water Trust documents. They need an administrator, someone who understands both the legal and practical aspects." "You want me to?" "I want you to consider it. Part-time, of course. We'll still have the ranch to run together, but your skills..." He smiled. "Let's just say I'm not marrying you for your cooking." She laughed, remembering her early disasters in the kitchen. "Rosa will be relieved to hear that. The point is, you've found your calling, not just as a rancher's wife, but as someone who ensures fairness, who guards the trust we've built. Your father surveyed the water. You'll help distribute it justly." The next morning brought the first meeting of the Dusty Ford Water Trust, in the same church where Pike had threatened to burn everything. Ranchers and farmers now sat together, reviewing Elias Hart's completed map and planning irrigation schedules. "The Navajo settlements need guaranteed access here and here." Lila pointed to the map. "My father marked these as traditional use areas. They have first rights." "That's upstream from my place," Ben Murphy objected. What if we all prosper because we're not fighting?" Jacob interrupted. "Ben, when drought hit 3 years ago, who shared their reserves with you?" Murphy flushed. "The Yazzie family." "Then maybe it's time we made that kind of sharing official instead of hoping for charity." The meeting progressed with surprising harmony. Old grievances surfaced, but were addressed through compromise rather than confrontation. By noon, they'd established basic principles: water sharing based on need-not wealth, rotation during drought, community maintenance of channels and ditches. Miss Hart, soon to be Mrs. Calder, will serve as record-keeper and arbitrator. Sheriff Hale announced, "Anyone object?" Silence greeted the question, followed by unanimous approval. As the meeting concluded, Lila noticed a young woman hanging back Sarah Chen, whose father ran the laundry. "Miss Hart, I was wondering. I can read and figure some. Do you think... might you need help with all that record-keeping?" Lila smiled, remembering her own desperate need for honest work. "I think that's an excellent idea. Sarah, can you start Monday?" The girl's face lit up. "Yes, ma'am, yes, Miss Hart." Walking home, Jacob took her hand. "Building that school can't come soon enough. You've started something." Father believed education and water were the two things that could transform the territory. Seems fitting to work on both. Speaking of which, Jacob pulled out an envelope. "This came while you were at the grave last night, from the Territorial Education Board." Lila opened it quickly, scanning the contents. Her eyes widened. "They're approving the school funding for a teacher. Basic supplies. Jacob, we did it." He swung her around in celebration, then set her down gently. "We need to find a teacher. Actually," Lila bit her lip. "I had a thought about that. What if we recruited from the East someone young, idealistic, looking for adventure? Like a certain surveyor's daughter I know." "Exactly. Post notices at teaching colleges? Offer fair wages and housing. Promise them they'll be making a real difference." "And mention the available bachelors in town," Jacob teased. "That's May's job. She's already got a list." They laughed, but the idea had merit. Dusty Ford was changing, becoming a place that attracted builders instead of destroyers. That night, as Lila updated the Water Trust ledgers by lamplight, she felt a deep satisfaction. Each entry represented a family that would farm another year, cattle that would survive the dry season, children who would grow up with enough. "Still working," Jacob appeared in the doorway. "Just finishing. Sarah starts Monday. I want everything clear for her." He moved behind her chair, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Have I mentioned lately how fortunate I am?" "Not since breakfast." "Then I'm overdue." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Lila Hart, you've brought justice to this valley, hope to its people, and joy to my life. I'm the richest man in the territory, and it has nothing to do with cattle." She turned in her chair to face him. Jacob called her. "If you keep talking like that, I might have to marry you sooner than spring." "Is that a threat or a promise?" "Both," she said, pulling him down for a kiss. Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon, and the spring water flowed clear and constant, shared freely among all who thirsted. Elias Hart's map hung in the church, no longer hidden but displayed proudly, a reminder that truth could prevail when good people stood together. The territory was vast, and injustice still lurked in other valleys. But here in Dusty Ford, beside the springs that had caused so much conflict, peace flowed as surely as water. It had been bought with courage, sealed with justice, and would be maintained by the daily choice to do right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, schools to build, disputes to mediate, a wedding to plan. But tonight, in the lamplit warmth of the ranch house, two people who'd found each other through tragedy looked toward a future bright with purpose. The water had found its true course at last. The spring rains had transformed the desert, painting the valleys with wildflowers that hadn't bloomed in years. Lila stood before the mirror in May Delaney's boarding house, adjusting the simple white dress Rosa had sewn with patient hands. Through the window, she could see guests gathering near Calder Spring, where Jacob waited beneath an arch woven from sage and desert roses. "Your father would be so proud," May said softly, pinning orange blossoms in Lila's hair. "You've become everything he hoped and more." "I wish he could be here." Lila touched the locket at her throat, containing his photograph. "He is, child, in the water flowing free, in the school rising where the old saloon stood, in every life you've touched." May stepped back, admiring her work. "Now, let's not keep that man waiting. He's been pacing since dawn." The ceremony was simple by Eastern standards, but perfect for Dusty Ford. Sheriff Hale, newly ordained for the occasion, stood ready with an old Bible. The assembled crowd represented the territory's transformation ranchers beside farmers. Navajo families intermixed with Mexican vaqueros. The Chinese laundry owner chatting with German homesteaders. Sarah Chen scattered flower petals as Lila walked toward Jacob, who stood transfixed in his best suit. Tom Rodriguez beside him, as best man. The spring bubbled cheerfully in the background, its waters catching the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. "Dearly beloved," Sheriff Hale began, his gravelly voice carrying emotion, "we gather at this spring source of life, cause of strife, and now symbol of unity to join two people who've shown us that love and justice flow from the same source." Jacob took Lila's hands, calloused from honest work, meeting fingers still ink-stained from ledgers. Their eyes met and held, speaking volumes in silence. "The vows," Hale prompted gently. Jacob cleared his throat. "Lila Hart, you came to this valley seeking truth and found yourself in the middle of a war. Instead of running, you stood firm. You've taught me that real strength isn't in holding tight, but in letting flow water. Knowledge, love. I promise to stand beside you through drought and plenty, to build not just a ranch, but a community, to be your partner in all things. I choose you, today and always." And Lila's voice rang clear despite her tears. Jacob called her. "You gave me shelter when I was lost, purpose when I despaired, and love when I'd forgotten how to hope. You've shown me that honor isn't just a word, but a daily choice. I promise to face whatever comes together, to nurture what we've planted, to be your true companion in work and rest. I choose you, forever and always." "The rings?" Hale asked. Rosa's grandson, Miguel, stepped forward with two simple gold bands, nothing fancy, but solid and true like the couple they'd adorn. As they exchanged rings, a red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing and wild. Some might call it coincidence, but Lila knew better. The land blessed what belonged to it. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife." Hale grinned. "Jacob, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, yet certain, a seal on promises that went beyond words. The crowd erupted in celebration, whoops from the cowboys, ululations from the Navajo women, May Delaney's tearful applause. The reception filled the new community barn with music and laughter. Joseph Yazzy's family performed a blessing dance while the German settlers contributed accordion music. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. Everyone had brought their best, creating a feast that represented the valley's diversity. "Time for the school announcement," Jacob whispered to Lila as the sun began to sink. She stood, tapping a spoon against her glass. "Friends, thank you for sharing this day with us. We have news that makes it even more special. The Territorial Board has approved full funding for our school. And," she smiled broadly, "we've hired our first teacher. Miss Emily Patterson from Boston will arrive next month." Cheers filled the barn. Parents hugged children who'd soon learn to read and write. The future had arrived in Dusty Ford. As the evening progressed, Dale Curtis appeared at the barn door, hat in hand. The crowd grew quiet, tension rippling through the room. He'd testified truthfully at trial, but memories ran deep. "Didn't come to cause trouble," he said quickly. "Just wanted to pay respects, and to give you this, Mrs. Calder." He handed Lila a leather journal, worn and water-stained. She opened it carefully, gasping at what she found her father's field notes, the ones that had been missing. "Found it in Pike's safe when we cleared out. Figured it belonged with family." Curtis shifted uncomfortably. "Your PA wrote about you in there. How proud he was. Thought you should have it." "Thank you," Lila managed through tears. "This means more than you know." Curtis nodded and turned to go, but Jacob called out, "Curtis, you hungry?" The former gunman stopped, surprised. "I reckon I am." "Then grab a plate," Man who brings truth to light deserves a meal. It was a small gesture, but significant. As Curtis cautiously joined the feast, Lila saw the community's capacity for forgiveness, another kind of water that brought life to desert places. Later, as the dancing began, Lila found herself by her father's map, now framed on the barn wall. Couples swirled past Tom Rodriguez with Sarah Chen, Sheriff Hale awkwardly courting May Delaney, even some of Pike's former men who'd chosen to stay and ranch honestly. "No regrets?" Jacob asked, joining her. "How could I regret this?" She gestured to the celebration. "Father mapped the water, but look what's grown from it. A real community, not just people surviving side by side." Speaking of growing things, Rosa appeared with a mysterious smile. "The house is ready for you." They'd expanded the ranch house over the winter, adding rooms for the family they hoped to build. But tonight, it had been decorated with wildflowers and candles, transformed into a proper home. As they prepared to leave, the crowd gathered outside for one last tradition. Instead of rice, they threw seeds grass for the cattle, vegetables for gardens, flowers for beauty. Each grain represented hopes for the future, blessings taking root. The ride home was quiet, stars wheeling overhead in the clear desert sky. Lila leaned against Jacob's shoulder, feeling complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About circles, how I came here with nothing but grief and Father's map. Now?" She gestured to the lights of town, the irrigated fields, the peace that had replaced fear. "Now I have everything." "We have everything," he corrected. "Partners, remember?" At the house, they stood on the porch, looking out over their domain, not an empire built on force, but a trust maintained by choice. The spring gurgled steadily, its channels carrying life to every corner of the valley. "I love you, Mrs. Calder," Jacob said softly. "I love you, Mr. Calder," she replied. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for falling into my life like water in the desert." Inside, the house waited their sanctuary, their beginning. On the mantel sat 3 photographs, Jacob's parents, Lila's father, and one taken today of the whole community, past, present, and future in harmony. As the night deepened, coyotes sang their ancient songs while the spring whispered its endless story. In the new barn, a few die-hard celebrants still danced. At the school site, fresh lumber waited for tomorrow's construction. Throughout the valley, water flowed in carefully maintained channels, bringing life equally to all. Months later, when Emily Patterson stepped off the stagecoach, she found not the wild frontier she'd expected, but a thriving community. Children ran to greet her, eager for the learning she'd bring. At the schoolhouse dedication, Lila stood with Jacob, her hand resting on her growing belly, watching the next generation stream through doors that would never close to anyone. "Look what love built," she murmured. "Love and water." Jacob agreed. The 2 things that always find a way. Sheriff Hale, now married to May, called the ceremony to order. Don Alejandro had traveled from Santa Fe to speak. Even some territorial officials attended, Dusty Ford having become a model for peaceful water management. But it was young Miguel Rodriguez who stole the show, reading haltingly but proudly from a primer. "We hold these truths, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The words rang across the desert, no longer just American ideals, but lived reality in this corner of the frontier. Elias Hart's map hung in the classroom, reminding all who entered that truth was worth any price. Years passed, children grew, the school expanded. The water cooperative became a model copied across the territory. Jacob and Lila's children played alongside those of former enemies, all equal beneath the vast western sky. On quiet evenings, Lila would stand by the spring with Jacob, watching sunset paint the mountains. The girl who'd arrived seeking justice had found so much more love, purpose, home. The wealthy cowboy who'd fought alone had learned the richness of shared strength. "Still no regrets?" he'd ask. "Tradition now." "Only one," she'd answer, smiling. "That father couldn't see this." "He sees," Jacob would assure her. "Every time water finds its way to someone thirsty, every time a child reads their first word, every time love chooses justice over easy profit, he sees. And in the spring's endless flow, in the community's laughter, in the turning of seasons over a valley at peace, Elias Hart's daughter knew it was true. The map had shown the way, but love had made the journey possible. Water and love both finding their true course at last, bringing life to all they touched, choosing their path not by force but by nature, flowing on forever beneath the eternal stars. The Virgin had indeed fallen into his arms. The rich cowboy had kissed her like he owned the stars, and they had chosen each other forever, not in a moment of passion but in daily acts of courage, justice and devotion that transformed a territory and showed that the greatest wealth flows free to all. In Dusty Ford, beside the spring that started it all, the water still runs clear and true, a testament to those who fought for right, who chose love over fear, who proved that, in the end, truth flows stronger than any lie, and love deeper than any well. Their story had become legend, but more than that, it had become example proof that two people, united in purpose, could indeed change the world, one act of courage at a time. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale tonight, perhaps cozied up at home, on your commute, or under the stars like our characters? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's connect over our shared love of these frontier stories. If Jacob and Lila's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover this story of love, justice, and courage in the American frontier.